The knock on my door came exactly one day after my neighbor buried her husband. That alone should tell you this story was never going to be simple. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at a coffee mug that had already gone cold, when I heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not rushed, not loud, just enough to be noticed. Something in my chest tightened before I even moved. I knew who it was. My name is James Carter. I am 32 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Denver, Colorado. I work as a corporate accountant, the kind of job where days blur together behind spreadsheets and emails. I am not exciting. I like routine. Most nights I eat dinner alone, watch a game or read a book and go to bed early. I liked that life. I liked knowing what tomorrow would look like before it arrived. Next door lived Eliza Matthews. She was 36, with calm green eyes and a quiet beauty that never tried too hard. She carried herself in a way that made people slow down around her, even when she barely spoke. She was married to Mark, a man in his late 40s. We had been neighbors for years. We exchanged polite hellos, nothing more. Mark always looked like he was late for something. Eliza always looked like she had time. Then, last week, Mark died. A sudden heart attack. 1 minute alive, the next gone. Police cars came. Neighbors whispered. People stood in small groups pretending not to stare. I did not attend the funeral. It did not feel like my place. So when I heard that knock the next afternoon, my body reacted before my mind did. I opened the door, and there she was. Eliza stood on my porch in a long black coat. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were red and tired, like sleep had forgotten her. She held a small cup in both hands, gripping it like it was the only solid thing left in her world. "Hi, James," she said softly. "Do you mind if I come in for a minute?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. Inside, the house felt warmer than usual. I made tea and offered her the couch. I did not ask questions. She sat quietly, staring at the steam rising from her cup. The silence stretched on, but it did not feel awkward. It felt shared. Finally, she spoke. "It's too quiet next door," she whispered. "I thought I could handle it. I just don't want to be alone right now." I nodded. She did not need to explain. We sat there like that for a while, 2 people sharing silence. Then she started talking about Mark, about how their marriage had not been perfect, about how over the years they had grown distant, how sometimes she felt more like his roommate than his wife. She did not cry. It felt like she was letting truth slip out slowly, piece by piece. "I know this sounds awful," she said, looking at me, "but part of me feels like I already grieved him before he died. Like I lost him a long time ago." I did not try to fix anything. I just listened. Before she left, she glanced around my living room and gave a small smile. "It's warm here," she said. Then she was gone, back to her empty house. That night, I could not focus on work. Her voice stayed with me. The way she held that cup like it was anchoring her to the world. Around noon the next day, another knock came. It was Eliza again. This time she wore jeans, sneakers, and a gray hoodie that looked like it had not been changed in days. No makeup. In her hands were 2 brown paper bags from the deli down the street. "I figured you forgot to eat," she said with a faint smile. "Thought I'd bring lunch." She stepped inside like it was natural, like she belonged there. And somehow it felt that way. We ate on the back patio under a gray sky. At first we did not talk. Eventually she broke the silence. "I thought I'd feel more devastated," she said. "Instead, I just feel empty, like I'm living someone else's life." She told me how lonely she had been long before Mark died, how grief had started years ago without her realizing it. "Have you ever felt like you were disappearing in your own home?" she asked. I nodded. I understood that kind of loneliness. We talked about simple things. Movies. Coffee shops. Dumb mistakes. I told her about the time I sent a company email with a terrible typo. She laughed. really laughed. And for a moment, she looked like someone who still had joy left. Her hand brushed mine on the table. It stayed there for a second, long enough for both of us to notice. Then she pulled back. "I should go," she said. "This is probably too soon." "You're not doing anything wrong," I said. "You don't have to be alone." She hesitated at the door, then nodded. Something had shifted. Nothing physical happened, but something unspoken had started. That night, the house felt different. Not empty, just aware, like it remembered her presence. I slept, but not deeply. The next morning was cloudy again. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold in my hands. My eyes drifted toward the window facing her yard. She stood on her porch, arms wrapped around herself, looking small and lost. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then came the knock. I knew it was her before I opened the door. Eliza stood there in a navy sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder, black leggings, no makeup. Just her. Her eyes looked tired, but focused, like she had been thinking for a long time. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside without hesitation. She walked into the living room slower than before, scanning the space like it might give her an answer. "I wasn't planning to come," she said. "I went back and forth for an hour. I didn't know where else to go." "You don't need a reason," I said gently. She sat on the couch, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. "I don't know how to be alone," she said. "I went from my parents' house straight to living with Mark. I've never lived by myself." She looked at me, really looked at me. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty being here?" she asked. I took my time. "I don't think there's a timeline for grief," I said, "and I don't think connection is something you're supposed to refuse." Her shoulders dropped like she had been holding her breath. "I don't want to go back there tonight," she said. "I feel like I'm going to suffocate." "You can stay here," I said. "I'll set up the guest room." Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. That evening passed quietly. Tea, clean sheets, soft words. Before bed, she hugged me. Not romantic, just human. "Good night," she whispered. As I lay awake later, aware of her presence down the hall, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The next morning was one of those gray mornings where the world feels quiet, even when it's moving. I woke up early, the soft light slipping through the curtains, but I stayed in bed a little longer than usual. There was a weight in the air today. Eliza's presence lingered, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't want the morning to rush by. I made coffee as usual, but today it didn't taste the same. I had this strange, almost surreal feeling, like the world had shifted slightly while I was sleeping. Her footsteps down the hall echoed in the quiet, and when she appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a gray blanket with messy hair, she looked tired but real, like she had been carrying something heavy for far too long. "Morning," she said softly, her voice warm but raw. "Hey," I replied, giving her a small smile, the kind of smile that felt more natural than anything I had done in weeks. I handed her a mug of coffee, and we both stood in the kitchen, sipping in silence. It wasn't awkward, not like it could have been. There was something calming about the quiet between us. I realized I didn't need to fill it with words. She finally broke the silence. "It's not awkward, right?" Her voice was hesitant, as if she was asking for permission, even though I hadn't given her a reason to feel that way. "No, it's not awkward," I assured her, the words coming easier now. "I don't think you're supposed to have a plan for grief. You're just getting through the next minute." She nodded, her eyes distant for a moment, lost in thoughts I couldn't reach. After a few moments, she let out a long breath. "Being here feels like I can breathe again, just a little bit." I knew that feeling, how the air gets thick when you're surrounded by silence, and how having someone just be there makes it easier to live in it. We didn't talk much more, just stood there, two people sharing the same space, both feeling something unspoken pass between us. Later that morning, we went for a walk around the neighborhood. The weather hadn't changed much, still gray, still cloudy, but it didn't matter. It was quiet, and for once, the silence didn't feel heavy. We walked side by side, close but not touching. Our arms brushed once or twice, but neither of us pulled away. We didn't talk about anything significant. We didn't need to. It felt like we were both just trying to understand how to be in the world again. At some point, she reached for my hand. It wasn't a desperate grasp, just fingers brushing lightly against mine, and it felt like the world stopped for a second. She looked at me, and in that moment, there was a shift. Something fragile, something that neither of us could name. But neither of us said anything. It was too soon, and we both knew it. The moment passed, and she let go of my hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft and unsure. "No, it's fine," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "You don't have to apologize." We continued walking, the moment lingering between us, but neither of us pushing for anything more. When we got back to the house, I made lunch. Just sandwiches, nothing special. But as we sat down to eat, the air between us felt lighter. She laughed when I told her about the time I burned the toast, and for the first time in days, I saw a real smile on her face. Not one of those forced smiles people wear to hide the pain, but a real one. "Thanks for letting me stay last night," she said, her voice softer than before, but genuine. I know it's probably too soon, but it felt like I could finally breathe. "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "You can stay as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere." She smiled again, but this time it was more than just an expression. It felt like something more, like the weight she had been carrying for so long was finally beginning to shift, just a little. The rest of the day passed quietly. We didn't do anything extraordinary. We folded laundry, sat on the couch, and watched some random show on TV. It felt like the kind of day you have when you're learning to move with someone, finding a rhythm without realizing it. And when the evening came, we sat at the kitchen table, eating pasta I had made, the conversation drifting from one topic to the next, without any real urgency. But something had shifted between us. It was subtle, unspoken. Later that night, we were sitting on the couch again, this time watching a nature documentary. She tucked her legs underneath her, leaning back against the cushions. I sat beside her, close but not touching. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "this feels nice. I haven't had a day like this I don't even remember." "You deserve more days like this," I told her. "You always did." She looked at me then, and there was something in her eyes that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't longing, it wasn't desire. It was something else, something quieter, deeper. And in that moment, I realized that neither of us were the same people we had been when the day started. Her head leaned onto my shoulder, and without thinking, I put my arm around her. It was natural, comforting. She didn't pull away, and I didn't want to let go. The room was quiet again, but this time it felt full of things that neither of us were quite ready to face, but things that were there, waiting. The night stretched on, and eventually we both went to bed. But the quiet between us felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just real. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because anything happened, but because the reality of everything felt so close now. The quiet wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of something I didn't understand yet. But I knew, deep down, that whatever it was, whatever had shifted between us, it wasn't going away. Not yet. The next few days passed like a slow wave, pushing forward but never quite crashing. Eliza didn't come over as often, but I felt her presence in the house even when she wasn't there. I kept waiting for her knock on the door, but it didn't come every day. Sometimes it was a text. Sometimes she would call to ask about something trivial. How I liked the new coffee place down the street, or if I'd seen the weather forecast. Simple things that helped keep the space between us from growing too wide. I couldn't explain it, but after that night on the couch, something had shifted inside me. I felt connected to her in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't about anything romantic, at least not yet, but something quieter. Something grounded in the kind of honesty that came from pain, from loss, from the simple need for another person to just be there. Then, one afternoon, I found myself standing at my door again. This time, it wasn't Eliza who knocked. It was my own instinct. I had a feeling. One of those gut feelings that you can't explain but know is true. I knew she needed someone to be there, even if she wasn't asking for it. I grabbed a bag of her favorite coffee from the local shop and headed next door. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but sometimes it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. When I knocked, Eliza answered right away. She looked surprised to see me, but there was no hesitation this time. She stepped aside to let me in, her eyes a little brighter than the last time I saw her. "What's this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at the coffee bag. "I thought you might need some," I said with a smile, feeling a little awkward. "Figured we could have a coffee together." She nodded, stepping aside so I could enter. She didn't seem surprised, and for the first time in days, she didn't look like she was carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. She looked lighter. We sat down on her couch with steaming cups of coffee in our hands. The room was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that made you feel like you weren't alone even without the need to fill the air with conversation. Eliza took a sip of her coffee and let out a soft sigh, closing her eyes for a moment, like she was savoring the moment. "This is exactly what I needed," she said, her voice quieter than usual, but there was warmth there. "I've been hiding in my own head for days." "I get it," I said, my words coming out a little slower than I expected. "Sometimes it's hard to be around people when all you want to do is be alone with your thoughts. But sometimes it's better not to be alone." She looked at me, her gaze softening. "I think I'm starting to understand that," she whispered. We didn't talk much after that, but there was something in the way we sat together that made the silence feel more meaningful. It wasn't the kind of silence that weighed down on you. It was the kind that lifted, even just a little. Later, when the evening rolled around, we decided to take a walk again. The neighborhood was still quiet, but there was a kind of peace in it now. No longer heavy, just calm. The world seemed like it had slowed down just enough to let us breathe. This time, as we walked side by side, our steps matched. Our arms brushed more frequently, like it was no longer something that needed to be avoided. And when we reached the end of the block, I looked at her, and she looked back at me. "Do you ever feel like you're walking through life with your eyes closed?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but firm in its truth. I stopped walking and turned to face her. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I think, sometimes, it's not about seeing everything at once. It's about taking one step, then the next, and trusting that you're not walking alone." Eliza's gaze softened, and she looked down at her feet for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Then she looked up at me, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. "I'm not sure if I know how to walk with someone again," she said, "but I want to try." My heart skipped a beat at her words, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't have to. Sometimes words weren't needed. We stood there in the quiet for a moment, the world moving around us, but for a moment it felt like time had stopped. And in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just about her loss. It wasn't about the grief she was carrying. It was about the two of us, finding each other in the quiet spaces, when everything else had fallen away. We started walking again, side by side, and this time our hands brushed again, but this time neither of us pulled away. The rest of the evening was simple. No grand gestures. No declarations of anything more than just being there for each other. But that was enough. More than enough. As I walked back to my house that night, I knew something had changed. Something had shifted between us, and it was a quiet, steady change. And even if we weren't ready for anything more, I knew we were moving in the right direction. The next morning, Eliza didn't knock on my door. Instead, she sent me a text. "Do you want to grab coffee tomorrow morning?" And that was all it took. It wasn't the start of anything dramatic. It wasn't the end of anything, either. But it was the beginning of something. Something new. Something real. And maybe that was all we both needed right now. The morning we met for coffee felt different from the others. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just different. Like the world knew something was slowly changing, and decided to stay quiet out of respect. I arrived early, mostly because I could not sit still at home. The coffee shop was small, warm, and half empty. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, and soft music played in the background. I chose a table near the window and waited. When Eliza walked in, I noticed right away how much more like herself she looked. Not healed, not fixed, just present. She wore a simple blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. No effort to impress, no armor, just her. When she saw me, she smiled, and something in my chest loosened. We ordered coffee and sat down. At first, we talked about ordinary things. Work, the weather, a movie she had watched the night before. It felt easy, like we had been doing this for years instead of days. But beneath the calm, there was something else. A careful awareness, like we were both walking across thin ice, paying attention to every step. After a while, she grew quiet. She stared into her cup, turning it slowly with both hands. "I went through Mark's things last night," she said. I waited. "I thought it would feel overwhelming," she continued. "But it didn't. It just felt finished, like closing a book I had already stopped reading." She looked up at me then, searching my face, maybe for judgment. I gave her none. "That doesn't make you a bad person," I said gently. She exhaled, relief flickering across her face. I was afraid to say that out loud. We sat there for a moment, the noise of a coffee shop fading into the background. "I realized something," she said quietly. "I've been grieving two things, his death and the life I thought I was supposed to have." I understood that more than I expected. After coffee, we walked back toward the neighborhood together. The air was cool, and leaves crunched under our feet. This time, she reached for my hand without hesitation. I held it. It felt natural, not rushed, not forbidden, just real. When we reached our street, she stopped. "I think I need to spend more time alone at my house," she said. "Not because I don't want to be around you, but because I need to prove to myself that I can do it." "I get that," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." Quote. She smiled, squeezing my hand once before letting go. That night, the house felt quieter than it had in days, not lonely, just honest. I realized how quickly she had become part of my routine, how her presence had shifted the rhythm of my life. I did not fight the feeling. I let it sit with me. Over the next few weeks, we settled into something gentle. Eliza came over some evenings. Other nights, she stayed home. We texted. We walked. We talked. There was no pressure to define anything, no rush to label what we were becoming. We let it unfold at its own pace. There were hard days. Days when she showed up with red eyes and shaking hands. Days when she needed to talk about Mark. Days when she needed silence instead. I stayed, not to fix her, just to be there. One evening, she came over later than usual. She looked exhausted, like the day had taken something from her she did not know how to get back. "I went to a dinner party," she said, sitting on the couch. "Everyone kept looking at me like I was fragile, like I might break if they spoke too loudly." Quote. I sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. "You don't have to be fragile here," I said. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, my arm wrapped around her without thought. We stayed like that for a long time, listening to the quiet. "Sometimes I'm scared," she admitted softly. "Not of being alone, of being happy again, like I'm not allowed to feel that yet." I tilted my head slightly, resting my cheek against her hair. "Happiness isn't something you earn by suffering long enough," I said. "It just shows up when it's ready." She nodded, her fingers lightly gripping my shirt. That night she stayed late. We talked until the clock crept past midnight. About childhood memories, about regrets, about things we had never said out loud to anyone else. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for not treating me like something broken." "You're not broken," I replied. "You're just rebuilding." She smiled at that, a real smile. As I watched her walk back to her house, I felt something settle into place inside me. This was no longer just about comfort, or timing, or grief. It was about choice, and without realizing it, we were both choosing each other. Days blurred together in a quiet, almost peaceful way. Eliza and I settled into a rhythm that felt less like something new, and more like something we had been doing for years, but hadn't noticed. She'd show up for coffee in the mornings, sometimes we'd go for walks, Sometimes we'd spend hours talking about nothing and everything. I never pushed her for more, and she never pulled away. We were just there, and somehow that was enough. I started to notice things about her. Little things. The way she smiled when she talked about her favorite books, how she would hum under her breath when she did the dishes, how her eyes would soften when she spoke of Mark. There were still days when she struggled with the past, days when she needed space to breathe, to process, but I didn't mind. I had learned that silence could be a conversation all its own, and sometimes that was all either of us needed. Then, one evening, about a month after we had first started spending time together, Eliza showed up at my door. It wasn't unusual for her to knock, except this time there was a different energy about her. Her posture was straighter, her eyes a little brighter. She didn't look broken. She looked ready. "Hi," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She walked straight to the couch and sat down without waiting for an invitation. I followed her, sitting opposite, unsure of what was coming next. "I've been thinking," she began, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "About everything, about what's happened between us. I've been trying to figure out how to say it, but I think it's just time." I waited, my heart thudding louder than I'd expected. Whatever this was, it felt like a pivot, a moment that would change the course of everything that had been building between us. "I don't want to move too fast," she continued, meeting my eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. "But I also don't want to keep hiding from what's right in front of me." I opened my mouth to say something, but she held up a hand, stopping me. "I'm not asking you for promises. I'm not even asking you for answers. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Not of what this might be, not of what it might become." Her words hung in the air, heavier than any silence we had shared in the past. I let them settle, feeling the weight of them, letting them take root. She wasn't asking for me to fix anything. She was just asking for permission. To be, to feel, to try. I leaned forward, my hands resting on my knees, watching her. "You don't have to be afraid," I said quietly. "We don't need to rush anything. We're just figuring it out." She smiled at that, a genuine, soft smile. "I know, I just needed to hear you say it." And that was it. The weight didn't disappear, but it felt lighter somehow, like we had both just agreed to stop carrying it alone. We stayed there, the two of us, not rushing to fill the silence. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like we were on the edge of something hard or heavy. I felt like we were just here, present, together. Over the next few days, things shifted again, but in small ways. It was subtle, how she would linger a little longer at my door before leaving. How we would find ourselves sitting a little closer on the couch, not talking, but feeling the connection grow in quiet moments. How, when we laughed, it was easier and more genuine. And then one night, after dinner at my place, as the evening began to settle into its usual comfortable quiet, Eliza turned to me. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with those green eyes, like she was trying to decide whether to say what she needed to say. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not running from anything anymore." I didn't need her to explain. I just nodded, understanding more than I thought I would. There was something liberating in her words. She wasn't running from her grief anymore. She wasn't running from me either. "I know," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Neither am I." We stayed like that for a while, just looking at each other, and in that moment, I knew that whatever this was, whatever we were building, whatever we were becoming, it was real. It was messy, and it didn't have to make sense. But it was real. The days that followed felt like a continuation of that understanding. The steady growth of something neither of us could quite label, but both of us were fully invested in. We didn't rush toward anything. We just let it unfold, knowing that neither of us had to have all the answers right now. Then one afternoon, a couple weeks later, I found myself at her door, knocking for the first time in a long time. She answered immediately, her expression brightening when she saw me. "Hey," I said, a little unsure of what I was about to say. "I was wondering if you wanted to go somewhere with me." She raised an eyebrow. "Go where?" "Just somewhere quiet, somewhere we can talk." without all the distractions. Her smile deepened. I think I'd like that. And that was how it started. Slow, steady, and simple. We didn't know where it would go, but we didn't need to. What mattered was that together we were walking in the same direction, one step at a time. It was a warm Saturday morning when we decided to take that drive. There was no real plan, just the need to be somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't filled with reminders of grief, but also not far from the quiet comfort we had come to know. I picked her up at her house, and we drove in silence at first, the kind of silence that isn't awkward but peaceful, like we were letting the miles between us carry the weight of everything we hadn't said. She had a playlist ready, something soft and familiar, and for the first time in a long time, the air between us didn't feel heavy with questions or expectations. It was just us, on the road, moving forward together, without rushing. We didn't talk about Mark. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't need to. That was what I had come to realize in the past few weeks. There was no need to rush into anything. We were both healing, slowly, in our own way. And whatever came next wasn't something we had to define right away. Eventually, we found ourselves at a small park near a lake, tucked away from the busy roads and familiar faces. We sat on a bench by the water, watching the ripples dance in the light. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. Eliza turned to me, her gaze soft, and for a moment, it felt like everything had come full circle. I never thought I'd be here, she said quietly. Not in this place, not in this moment. I understood. I had been there too, thinking I knew what life was supposed to look like, what my future would be, but sometimes the unexpected moments are the ones that shape us the most. You don't have to know where this is going, I said, my voice steady but full of meaning. It's okay not to have all the answers. She smiled, her eyes reflecting something lighter now, something closer to hope than it had been when I first met her. I think I'm learning that, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat there for a long while, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable but full of understanding. I could feel it. How far we had come, how far she had come, and how much we had learned to share without needing to speak. Later that day, as we walked back to the car, Eliza stopped and looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time in a way that wasn't clouded by grief or loss. I think I'm ready, she said, her words holding more meaning than I expected. Ready for what? I asked, a little confused, unsure if I had heard her right. She reached out, taking my hand gently in hers. Ready to not be afraid anymore, ready to move forward. Not forget the past, but choose what comes next. And just like that, I knew it wasn't about moving on from what we had lost. It was about choosing what we wanted to build from the ashes of everything we had endured. Together. We'll take it slow, I said, squeezing her hand softly. But I'm here. Whenever you're ready. She smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face, and nodded. I think I'd been ready for a while. And that was it. The future wasn't something we had to rush into. We didn't need to define it with grand gestures or promises. We had already made the most important choice. We had chosen each other, quietly, steadily, in a way that felt right. We drove home in silence, but this time it wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the kind of silence that felt full of everything we had learned, everything we were still learning, and everything we had yet to discover together. When we reached her house, she didn't rush to get out of the car. She turned to me, her eyes soft but certain. Thank you, she said, for being here, for not rushing me, for just being. I didn't need to say anything. I simply nodded, my heart full of a quiet certainty that had taken time to reach. You don't have to thank me, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm not going anywhere. And as she stepped out of the car and walked toward her house, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Not of something perfect, but of something real, something built on trust, understanding, and the quiet promise of choosing each other day by day. And that was all we needed.